Mohammed, we see that you are connected. Could we just test your video and audio, please?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can.
Yeah. So.
So this is where we bring glasses together without breaking them. Ideas that may disrupt things. Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa for the United Nations, Madam Christina Duarte, representatives of member states, distinguished professors, academics, panelists, policymakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning again from here in Conference Room 2 at UN headquarters on this Wednesday, the 3rd of December. It is the final day of this year's academic conference on Africa, organized, led, initiated, and coordinated by the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. Now, on Monday, the 1st of December, yesterday, Tuesday, the 2nd of December, we have been exploring, discussing, trying to find solutions to many issues because from the concept note, nearly 2/3 of Africans believe their countries are headed in the wrong direction. And most Africans are dissatisfied with the functioning of democracy. In fact, Africa is described as a youthful continent. And yesterday, during discussions here with Professor Lembe Tiki, I kept wondering why a youthful continent is being led by a gerontocracy, but I could not put that across. On day number 1, the theme that we explored was all about the state of the state in Africa, presence, perception, and performance in a changing world. Then yesterday, we were looking at transforming the state, reclaiming the future, and pathways to African renewal. Today, the final day, day number 3, we are focusing on ideas that build nations, leveraging African scholarship for a new era of policy making. Ideas that build nations, leveraging African scholarship for a new era of policy making. Before I proceed to the distinguished people on the panel, let me just remind all of us that we have English and French interpretations available. If you are a French speaker and you're hearing English here, you just get your earpiece and you should be able to get everything translated for you. I would also like to mention, if you are here but you would like your colleagues, friends, family to follow the discussions that are going on here, right now you can take your phone, which should be on silent, and you can just inform them to go to webtv.un.org. webtv.un.org. In fact, if you go there, you will find all the proceedings from Monday and yesterday. We are also live on YouTube, where we encourage people there to put comments in the chat box. And over the next 3 hours, on this final day, there's going to be a panel discussion, as we've had, and then the last 1 hour would be open to all of us here in Conference Room 2 so that as you are listening and participating this morning, you take notes, you have questions, maybe you have the right solution that will solve all of Africa's problems by 31st December this year. Just be patient with us, write it down for us, so when we come to you in that last 1 hour of the discussions, you can share that with us. Everybody online is also welcome to YouTube. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce today's distinguished panel of experts, professors, and thought leaders. We have Professor Ndri Therese Asi Lumumba. I think I got that right. She must be from the famous DR Congo. Partly.
I will introduce myself.
Okay. I saw the name Lumumba, and as a Pan-Africanist, I couldn't help. This distinguished sister is a professor of African diaspora and comparative international education and gender at Cornell University. She is also a distinguished visiting professor, University of Johannesburg. Could you put your hands together and welcome her? And next, we have Associate Professor of Anthropology and Director of International Studies from Fairfield University, Professor Alfred Babo. And right next, on my left, my brother from the Giant of Africa, Program Director for the African Peacebuilding and Developmental Dynamics, APDD Program, Social Science Research Council, Dr. Cyril Obi. And last, but not the least, the moderator for this morning, a Makala Family and Faculty Fellow and Associate Professor for the Politics and International Affairs Department, Wake Forest University, also a visiting fellow, Weatherhead Center at Harvard University. My pleasure to introduce and hand you all of us over to Professor Lina Ben-Abdallah. Please. Professor Ben-Abdallah, we are in your hands.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben, for the kind introductions. Welcome, everybody, to this session. The session today is titled Ideas That Build Nations, Leveraging African Scholarship for a New Era of Policy Making. As we begin, I would like to start by thanking our hosts for facilitating the space for us to have these conversations. So thank you to the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Madame Duarte, and her entire office team for their hospitality. So on this third day of the conference, our agenda today is to discuss the nexus between scholarship and practice. We will be discussing the obstacles, hopes, the motivations that surround this nexus. As Madame Duarte stated in her opening remarks 3 days ago, and I quote, "There is no sovereignty without sovereign mindsets, and there is no sovereign mindsets without sovereign scholarship." The USG also observed that whereas Africa's epistemic infrastructure exists and is doing a lot of work, it remains marginalized in the grand scheme of things, despite being a strategic asset that should be harnessed and leveraged for the sake of the public good. So today we ask the question, then why is this marginalization, right? Why are we still facing this marginalization despite the good work that's been done? And here to frame the session, I would like to offer three points that I think will help us and help our panelists unpack these questions of this nexus for us in the next few hours. So in the first place, I think in my view, there is a huge misperception gap about this perceived lack of rigorous intellectual enterprise that's coming from African academy. In a short piece, I call this a literacy problem. It's a problem that the Western academy suffers from, when it comes to recognizing knowledge production, political thought, and innovative ideas that come from these othered places, including the African continent. We must be very clear in rejecting the notion that Africa does not produce scholarship, or it lags behind in innovation. Such kind of assumptions and misperceptions are categorically problematic and not reflective of the realities on the ground. We have a wealth of scholars from the continent, on the continent, and outside of the continent that work on these issues, several of whom have been invited to this very conference 2 years ago and last year, and several of them are here with us today in this room, who have been tirelessly working on recovering and rectifying these notions that Africa and the African intellectual is just a consumer of global knowledge, a consumer of global norms, a consumer of these scholarships, and not a producer of this. This is not the case, as scholars will remind us of the Monday Charter, which was proclaimed in the 13th century in Mali, laying down foundations for social justice, for human rights, for this early on. They will also remind us of the origins of the principle of the responsibility to protect, and the examples are far too long for me to enumerate here. And our esteemed panelists will tell us more about some of these, some initiatives, some projects that have been, and institutions on the continent that have been fighting the good fight on the continent for decades, trying to really make this difference. The work that we have to do on our side here is to be aware of these spaces, give them the floor, work with them rather than speak for them, promote and amplify their work, that the work that has already been done, instead of replicating it and discovering it anew only with fancier institutional affiliations and more pedigree. So this brings me to the second point that I want to make here, which is the role and the place of the diaspora in this enterprise of knowledge production, and especially here in this praxis of knowledge to practice, or scholarship to policy making. With the contributions of our experts here, we hope to have a candid conversation about how diaspora intellectuals fit or do not fit within this nexus. What are some examples of successful collaborations and partnerships? What has been done? What can be done more? And what needs to change or be amplified? How can we ultimately work together, include our perspectives, not overburden, or make visible without being, without imposing? The third point I want to make here has to do with the structural challenges, because we can talk about all of these issues and sort of at a meso and a micro level, but there is still a macro level. There is still this question of structural challenges and the bigger picture of epistemic injustice, or again, what I call sort of this problem of literacy and stubbornness within the Western academy, in its reluctance to being open to the idea that others already have systems that work for them and have institutions and structures that work for them. Because let's face it, these structural challenges are colossal. They are, and they will not dissolve on their own if we do not enact structural changes to the global system of knowledge production, essentially to overhaul some of these issues. The simplest examples here for me would be to think back on the COVID-19 pandemic and the disproportionate impact it had globally on K through 12 education, for example, and looking at several news coming from home, from different parts of the continent, and the inability to afford switching, right, to this digital education, and how it was almost seamless in some parts of the world and not in others. The cost of doing research is prohibitive, as we've heard from our keynote speaker 2 days ago, Professor Nuruddin Farah, when he was talking about sort of traveling between and across within the African continent, and how that's much more expensive than traveling from outside of it to different parts of the continent. Other problems as well, structural problems, exist in terms of access, and access in scholarship and access in spaces to do scholarship and to do field work. When scholars come in from any Western major institution and walk right through the doors to have all access to our elites, to do the research, and they speak to officials when local researchers are not taken seriously. These are issues that we face when we are talking about sort of access and talking about these structural issues. The perception that scientific rigor only comes from the West, it only comes from the outside, it's externally driven, right? These are issues these are structural issues that we have a problem with when we submit research to grant institutions and to publications and to book presses and so on and so forth, and the perception that comes with that these are structural issues that are impeding sort of this knowledge and epistemic justice and knowledge production. And not so much knowledge production, the point I'm making is knowledge is being produced in the continent. There is knowledge. It's not about we are missing this knowledge. The whole point is it's already there. It's a question of literacy in terms of accessing it, in terms of seeing it, in terms of respecting that there is the work already been done, and we don't need to replicate it from an institution from the West for it to be legitimate or for it to exist or for it to be visible. That is the one point that I want to make here and reiterate. But as to my part, I will say that for my perspective, well begun is half done, and I think that understanding and diagnosing what we are up against is a major first step in the right direction. And I hope that this conversation will help us get beyond this first step. But I think, again, well begun is half done. If we have a clear understanding of what the problem is, then we can discuss the solutions. But unless we really understand the problem with all of its angles, with all of its micro and macro issues, I think we can be just chasing our own tails in that sense. So I will now run our plan for the session. I will very briefly here introduce a little bit, provide a bit of more background on our three distinguished speakers. Then we will have kind of a discussion amongst ourselves. I will give them each between 5 to 7 minutes to make their opening remarks, and then we'll have a discussion, after which we will invite our UN system respondents to provide us with their feedback, and then we will have sort of an interactive dialogue with the audience after that. I will introduce all the panelists together and then hand them the floor each at a time for their opening remarks. And we will go in the order we have in the agenda. Professor Andri Assier-Lumumba is a professor of African diaspora and comparative international education and gender at Cornell University in the Africana Studies and Research Center. Currently distinguished visiting professor at the University of Johannesburg. Her past leadership positions include Director of Cornell Institute for African Development, President of Comparative and International Education Society, President of the World Council of Comparative Education Societies, and Chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Program for the Management of Social Transformations. A Fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science, she has held distinguished positions in Africa and globally and received numerous awards. She has served as a policy analyst on an assessment panels for countries, foundations, international and non-governmental organizations. She has published extensively peer-reviewed articles and books, including her recent edited and co-edited volumes, Re-envisioning Education in Africa, Ubuntu-Inspired Education for Humanity, Education and the Development of Human Capital, Outcomes for Equity and Governance in Africa, Ubuntu and Comparative Education and International Education for Peace, and the list is very long in terms of all of the accomplishments that Professor Assier-Lumumba has accomplished. Her new book is Technology and African Education Democratization, School Television in Côte d'Ivoire and Beyond. We will hear from her first in our order. Second, we will hear from Dr. Alfred Babo, who is an associate professor of anthropology and director of the International Studies program at Fairfield University in the US. Before joining Fairfield, Dr. Babo has taught at the University of Bouaké in Côte d'Ivoire, as well as Smith College and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Dr. Babo is an interdisciplinary scholar with expertise in development anthropology, political science, African studies, and refugee studies. He has presented his research at national and international conferences and has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals and books on the state policies, discussing political ethnicity, citizenship, and post-war governance. Dr. Babo's current research projects and publications focus on the issue of refugees activism in Africa and acculturation in the US. His article titled 38 Paradise Road, Being an African Francophone Refugee Scholar in American Academia, has been featured in the 2023 Conference on Refugee at Risk, Concepts, Infrastructures, Futures at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Babo is co-editor of the book Exiled Scholars in Western Academia, Refugees or Intellectuals, and he will be speaking second on the panel. Last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Cyril Obi, who is Program Director at the Social Science Research Council in New York, where he leads the African Peacebuilding Network and Developmental Dynamics, the APDD program. After completing his doctoral studies in political science at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, he joined the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs in Lagos and became an associate research professor in 2004. He's well published as well. There's a long list of peer-reviewed articles, journals, books, co-edited books and volumes in highly ranked journals and university presses as well. Professor Obi has co-edited many books, as I mentioned, and has also received numerous prestigious international academic awards, including the 2020 International Studies Association Distinguished Scholar Award from the Peace Studies section. In 2024, he was appointed an honorary fellow at the Center for African Studies at the University of Edinburgh and extraordinary professor at the Center for Gender and African Studies, the Faculty of Humanities at the University of the Free State in South Africa. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Professor Asier Lumumba for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have 7 minutes, so I have to go really quick. But before, I still want to thank Madame Cristina Duarte. Thank you for your vision. And I'm happy to be in this group. I thank you colleagues, the entire office, for their efficiency and kindness in welcoming us. And I thank our distinguished keynote speaker, all the esteemed colleagues, students here in this room and in different parts of the world. My name is Indri Asier Lumumba. Asier. Asier. It's Akan.
Oh.
The land, the earth.
Okay.
Okay. Lumumba.
What she's saying, Asier, she's linking to Ghana. I'm Ghanaian, she's trying to draw some linkages, so please.
We are the same. Okay. It's just a border that we didn't draw.
Yes.
And yes, the other name that people have question mark about, my spouse is from DRC. Okay. I would like to start my brief introduction using the Akan concept of Sankofa. According to the Sankofa, we cannot go back. And it's not even always desirable to try to go back, because we have to have that critical perspective on where we have been. However, it is absolutely necessary to look back in order to be taught about how we got where we are and what made us be where we are, all the factors involved, so that we can reflect on the contradictions and possibilities before us in order to strategically plan for the future. That's the whole notion of Sankofa. So this is my Sankofa perspective guiding me. I would like to recall that all societies across the globe, historically, I'm also a trained historian, sociologist, before I went to education. And my studies were in Côte d'Ivoire up to the first year of education, university. Then I went to France, and then a little time in Canada before I did my PhD at the University of Chicago here in the US. I reflected on the education system, the meaning of education in all my personal trajectory. But one thing that, looking from the historical perspective, I'm very fascinated with is how the Africans reacted to colonization. Everywhere. There was no internet where you can send messages to people from West Africa to Central Africa, Southern Africa. But they were reacting the same way. It's just fascinating. Even if you're not a historian, go and look at the archives. It is so really enriching to look at that. And what happened? It's simply because of their education. The education they received from Africa taught them about being able to govern yourself, being able to teach the young people histories and knowledge about the future generation. Or it's just fascinating how many Africans reacted. If we allow our children to go to the schools of these invaders, we're giving up on our future. And will what they will learn worth what they will forget from our side? It's very, very powerful. So briefly then, this is what happened. And the Europeans also understood very clearly the critical importance of education. In an article I wrote recently in praise of my mentor, the famous, the only Samir Amin, I criticized Karl Marx, saying that his emphasis on the economy was not correct, that education is central, because when education is done right, even if you are colonized, you are exploited, you will gladly contribute to your own exploitation. That's what some of our leaders do. And in my own country, Côte d'Ivoire, that's what the colonial education had done to them. That you do exactly as the colonizers were doing, take African resources and send them to the colonial power. That's what they're doing. So the European emphasized the need to create education institutions across the continent in the different, whether they were the British with their famous or infamous indirect rule, or the French were claiming to create system where they will create black or non-white French in terms of their taste and so forth. They all had the same object, using education to frame the African, the colonized, not only for the immediate needs, but for the future. They were looking beyond the 21st century when they created their education system. In the case of the Congo, they thought actually they had found the right formula, like you having a production function formula of what ingredient you put in to train the perfect colonized people, enough to be useful and be used, but not too much to create problems. So that was the type of education that they created. I can say a little more about it later, but what I would like to say here is that education as a social institution has two sides. That side of reproduction, that side of control of whoever is in power, that side of reproducing the ethos of society. If it's a collective system, then the education system will reproduce that collective ethos and mind. But if it is enthusiastic, if it is exploitative, the education will produce individuals and groups that will do that. But the other side of education that is not often mentioned is that no matter how powerful that side of social reproduction, it has the possibility of giving agency. It's never 100% only exploitation, control. Otherwise, no African would have raised a voice against colonization. We will still all be formally colonized. They were able to do that because they nurtured that little component of agency. As the great many Africans who have written about this, Kizerbo, the philosopher from Burkina Faso, you can teach the people the way you want. You can, Malthusianistic, he used that term. Give it the little minimum, but once they learn how to read and write, you cannot control entirely what they read. And the Africans who were nurturing that agency part did exactly that. And Mwalimu Nyerere, who was educated in the system, Catholic system, in Tanganyika at the time, went to Great Britain. He said, well, once you have been well schooled in the colonial system, you have to engage in your education. It means you have to use that part of agency in order to question, in order to position yourself. You know, in the slave societies of the Western Hemisphere, including here in the United States, formal education was against the law. The enslaved people had no right to learn how to read and write. They were punished severely if they were caught learning to read and write. Okay, so then that dimension of education is what has sadly been left in our countries, creating these leaders who are not actually leading. They're leading to play the role of colonial subjects, even if the colonization is not formal anymore. So then that's the reproduction of the received knowledge, the received system, and even worse, at some point, the received system was being functioning. People were learning, performing. Even when some of us coming from Africa, going to study in Europe or here, we outperform the natives of those countries. I can give examples to that. However, those who are reproducing the colonial system have brought that down. When in a country you have a minister of education who is literally illiterate, and here I'm not talking, when I talk about illiteracy, I'm not talking about those who can't read and write European languages. Our people are very educated, literate in their own culture, but I'm talking about somebody who is supposed to be the one designing, guiding an education system, teaching the young generation, training them for the future, but he's not capable of reading. I'm talking about my country. We had that sad experience in recent years. So my time is finishing quickly. So these are some of the issues that I want to break, that education can be and must be at the center of the liberation. We need to nurture that even when it's little, when they have covered, they control everything, but that little part of agency, it is always there. So those who are exploiting Africa, selling African people and resources, they can say, well, it's not my fault. I have been trained in the colonial education. No, it's a choice they make. Yeah. And we have to make them accountable. And so agency is there. Let us nurture it. That agency brought us here under the leadership of Madame Duarte. Thank you.
Okay, now Alfred Babu, we hear from you for 7 minutes.
Thank you. I won't do kind of repeat all the gratitude that we have to be here. And I would like to thank all the organizers and, of course, the audience for being with us. I want to structure my statement around 4 points that I will cover briefly, giving the chance for any feedback later during our conversation here or with the audience. The first point I would like to highlight is listening for the last 2 days is that we need new leaders in Africa who will transform education, kind of building up on what Professor Andrew was saying, will transform education into human capital and knowledge into the primary resource. Because for now, people are sending their kids to school thinking that they're just going to look for, just to look for a job, for a career. I think we need leaders who will understand that the knowledge produced is a primary resource that Africa needs. Otherwise, we will have uranium, but we're still living in darkness. We will have gold, but we never know how to use it, how to transform it. So education is the key, but it's really how to transform those who are getting out of this education system into the main resource, the human capital that we need to change things. And human capital must be the foundation of any development and its planning. So for me, I think one thing concrete we can do is to bring closer academics to policymakers, is to think about maybe a kind of think tank or a kind of pool of academics that could be tried at the national level to gather maybe twice a year, first in the beginning of the year, to discuss the government action. And at the end of the year, to analyze what has been done. Is it possible to have a pool of prominent professors from different backgrounds that the government would gather, maybe with the sponsor or with the help of the UN agencies, and ask them, please look at our action, what we have done during this 1 year or 2 years, and give us feedback. This is possible only if those academics can enjoy freedom. Freedom to think. So that leads me to my second point. Academic freedom is very important, and I attended recently the conference in Dar es Salaam when we decided to revisit the 2 declarations, Kampala and Dar es Salaam declarations. Those who were kind of in 1990s, where we started thinking about protecting academics and making the point that the freedom to think is a very important resource, because the pool that I was just suggesting, people will be free to say whatever they need to say to the governors, to the executive, only if they can freely think and provide ideas, criticism to the government. That will be more beneficial. But for that, we need to stop what happened early at the beginning of the independence, when many scholars, many intellectual Africans left the continent because they were threatened or put in jail. So this needs to stop by really protecting, promoting academic freedom. The third point is, of course, for this academic freedom to thrive, we really need to put at the center of our society, or to bring it back, according to the historian, because we had that in the past, to bring back debates and not fear contradiction. In our gerontocratic society today, when you say something different from the leader's point of view, is considered an offense. How dare you say something different from the president of your party or from the president of the country? But this is the problem, because many of us fear saying something different from the leader. And we need to bring the debate to the center of how we govern things. The debate and the contradiction is the center of academics, is the nature of academic knowledge. How we build academic knowledge is through contradiction. It's through challenging things. It's through challenging certainties. It's through questioning things. But if in our society, once you question something, when you question the view of the president or the view of the leaders is considered an offense, then we have a problem here. We cannot build our scientific, knowledge if we don't put back at the center the debate and the contradiction. I will finish with the last point, which is kind of reflexive reflection. What do we do ourselves as academics when we had the chance to serve as executive? What was our contribution? Do we stop at some time to look at what we have done to our countries? Because we can blame those who are in the executive, we can be upset, but we had the chance sometimes to serve as advisor or maybe member of the government. And it's impressive how some of the academics, professors of universities who have taught in universities, who have published, can flip once they join the government. And you can't even recognize those people denying what they have taught, what they have supported, what they have promoted. Totally corrupt. So I'm inviting also African scholars to kind of reflect on what was our role in what's happening in our country in terms of keeping this dysfunction of the state, this dysfunction of the democracy in our continent is also due to our own contribution to that. And for that, I can just to finish with this example, of course, is something which is happening in many countries, but the Ivorian case is impressive. You have a professor of law who will come to say to the population, support this reform, this referendum. This is why the president cannot run for the third term. I'm professor of law, and I'm telling you, these are the different articles that will prevent this president from running for a fourth or a third term. At the end of the second term, guess what happened? This same guy came and said, who am I? The president is better, he knows better than me. Really? So this is where we are in terms of us questioning our own role in what's happening on our continent. I want to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Alfred. I turn it over to Cyril Obi for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to identify with the previous speakers in terms of thanking Madam Christina Duarte and her fantastic team for putting together this very interesting academic conference. It's interesting they call it academic, but I'll get back to that later. I also want to thank the distinguished members of the audience. This is a very rich audience of scholars, practitioners, and policymakers. It's very rare in the world I inhabit to find this unique collection of people. My approach would be very, I will use the word very, it's a bit strong, would be different. Because what I'm going to do is to raise questions. But before I raise questions, I'm going to give you a background. And I will say, knowledge is power. Let that sink. that knowledge is even more powerful than the nuclear bomb, than all the technologies you have, because knowledge creates them. Now, when I looked at the title of this panel, Ideas That Build Nations, Leveraging African Scholarship for a New Era of Policy Making, I asked myself certain questions. Ideas that build nations. Is it the ideas that build the nations or the knowledge that builds the nations? Leveraging African scholarship. How do you leverage something when you still have questions about its ownership and its control? And is there really a new era of policy making? What interests does, what and whose interests does policy making serve at the end of the day? We all agree that development is good for everybody, Africans inclusive. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions in the 7 minutes I have. I was hoping that Madam Chair would tell me that since the previous speaker probably did not use 7 minutes, I can borrow from some of his minutes. But the sad news is that the 7 minutes has been used, so I just have to manage what I have. Now, the first question is, what is the state of nation building in Africa? And my argument is that nation building is still work in progress. It's actually in a state of flux, and that it is highly contested. Do you really have nation states in Africa? Or do you have political contraptions that are still in a state of becoming, where groups are jostling for power, and where you have relationships of domination, subordination, and marginalization? And what does it mean for us when we look into ideas? The way a lot of people sum up the incomplete or work in progress state of nation building in Africa is that they call it the national question. Is there a national answer? And who will define the national answer? The second thing is, where do ideas come from? Particularly ideas that transform. And I'm arguing that, and I have a shopping list of where ideas come from. They come from thought, they come from imagination, they come from experience, they come from education, they come from asking questions, learning, practice, imitation, and conversations. You have a conversation with somebody and you are either in your car or on the bus or on the train, and some idea, a light bulb comes on, and the idea comes. But how do you, at what point, and how do you transform ideas into knowledge? What is the place of concept building and research in knowledge production? Whose knowledge? For what purpose is knowledge being produced? And why is it even important? I argue that we cannot grapple effectively with these questions without going back to the theory and philosophy of knowledge in terms of its foundational principles, methods, and scope. Given Africa's history and current realities, I would argue that the state of knowledge, and by extension scholarship, requires us to reflect on epistemology. That word has come up again. And these following concepts, and that is why I was thoroughly excited on the first day when I heard the Undersecretary General talk about sovereignty. And for me, there are certain key concepts. There is the whole question of epistemic freedom and liberation, which has to do with the right, the power to define what principles would undergird knowledge production. Epistemic sovereignty. Who owns epistemic sovereignty? whose property is it? Let me speak like somebody from West Africa. Epistemic justice. This is a kind of justice where you don't go to court. It is not in a sentence. It is born out of struggle. Struggle between a dominant epistemological framework or frameworks and those that are being marginalized, suppressed, or dominated. How do you resist such epistemologies? Do you disrupt them? Do you disobey them? Or do you ignore them? So, how do you leverage African scholarship for a new era of policy making? This raises several questions. Again, I'm asking more questions. So see this as a kind of conversation where some people have put me on this side. But actually what I'm doing is to push the questions to you so that I can learn from you and you can learn from yourselves. Because the answer does not lie anywhere. It lies within us. The way we think, who we imitate, what the experiences we have, and what we want to accomplish in society. You can look at the state of education in Africa today, whether you are talking of formal education. The statistics are not very nice. Although the universities are growing, there is massive enrollment, but it is not even enough. Some people will say that in terms of out-of-school children in Africa, you are thinking in terms of millions, between 10 and 15 million are considered to be out of school. But the question is, does Africa own and control knowledge production on the continent? In whose interest is knowledge being produced? And how can the African scholarship, which really deals with learning and producing knowledge, how can it be leveraged for policy making? How has it been leveraged so far? And what does it have to do to become a transformative force? How can we harness Africa's scholarly potential more intentionally and latch it on to the continent's quest for transformative and sustainable development? A lot is being done, as has been mentioned already by my colleagues, but it's also not being coordinated. There is no cohesion, there's no coming together. And where are our models? Must all the models come from outside? How can we make our success stories in the little corners and in the disparate places where they are visible and impactful? Some people will tell you that when you look at global scientific publications, Africa accounts for 2.2%. And that is a UNICEF report, if I'm not. Is it UNICEF now? UNESCO. 2.2%. And yet, there are so many universities, there are so many scholars. It's either African scholars sit under a tree in the afternoon, staying away from the hot sun, or what they are producing is either not counted or is invisible. How can we make the knowledge visible? How can people see what Africans are doing? If you look at the global architecture of publications, how can we support Africa to build its own publishing and dissemination infrastructure in such a way that it becomes more visible and impactful? What are we talking about? Do we decolonize scholarship? If we only have to decolonize scholarship, what do we do about decolonizing policy and practice? Since the power of knowledge equally shapes the architecture of policy and practice, who will deliver us from us? The whole question of knowledge production and education are Siamese twins. Now, I made an error. Actually, the figure for out-of-school children in Africa is 98 million. 10 million is for the beautiful country called Nigeria. What are the problems? We can talk until our faces turn blue. Funding. That's funding for education generally. At a time, some multilateral agencies told us that higher education is not good for Africa. You should only focus on primary school education. Now, when you look at the history of education, whether you are thinking in terms of pedagogy, you are thinking in terms of curriculum, or in terms of teaching, go back to colonial history. There was something called the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. What do we have today? Tandika Makandawire once said that there's a global division of global knowledge production. And it described the African scholars as hewers of wood and drawers of water, basically saying that a lot of African researchers have been reduced to data collectors, while the theorizing was left to a particular region of the world. What impact does that have when you want to transform policy and practice? Whose interests does that kind of knowledge produce? Whose interest does it advance? So the question then becomes that if knowledge production is not a neutral process, there are winners and there are losers. There are relationships of domination, subordination, and marginalization. And Africa wants to develop under epistemologies that deny them the agency to dictate how they want to govern and develop themselves. What do you have? Epistemic resistance. You have to disrupt that kind of epistemology. You have to decolonize higher education. Curriculum should address local realities and include indigenous knowledge. Research should be grounded on epistemological sovereignty, relevance to development, and disseminated in ways that do not only contribute to knowledge production, but also help to shape policy. We have to recenter African knowledge in policy. But if you do that, don't live in la-la land. Your agency would have to displace a particular agency that thrives on the subordination of your own agency. How do you negotiate that? Do you fight? Do you do what I call selective engagement and selective choice making? How can the scholarship we have in our universities in Africa contribute to shaping of policy? How many policymakers read abstracts of PhD dissertations? How many researchers have actually met and engaged with policymakers? There's always this distrust, a distrust of, hey, I'm a researcher. I have all the data. My data has fantastic arguments and fantastic conclusions. These policymakers don't have time. There's distrust. How can we build trust between those who produce knowledge and those who consume knowledge? And how can issues of accessibility, visibility be addressed so that when research findings come out based on what I call purposive research, policymakers and practitioners would be able to consume? And finally, I see Madam Chair is looking at me from the corner of her eyes. Finally, and this is my finally, we have to be in conversation. Conversation is the key in addition to the various things. So I have raised questions and I have landed. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for your generosity.
Thank you so much for this first round. I will turn around in here and ask you to perhaps share with us some of your experiences of working with institutions in the continent that are doing some of this work, right? Some of this basically this enterprise of knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, and just tell us a bit about your experiences, perhaps with Codestria, as we were discussing yesterday, Prof, or with the Peace Building Network, with what we have sort of experienced in terms of these partnerships and collaborations. Just give us something more concrete and give us some experiences of what this looks like on the ground, just so that we get into sort of this deeper the details. Thank you. Maybe we'll follow the same order and just give you a few minutes to.
Yeah, since you mentioned, thank you, Madam Chair. Since you mentioned specifically Codestria, let me also mention that Codestria didn't just appear. It's the late Samir Amin, who, when the United Nations, given he was very flexible, not to differentiate or create a gap between the UN system and academia. He was really a role model in terms of his capacity to navigate these spaces. So it started with IDEP. The UN wanted him to create an institution of training. Yes, there's need of training. You know, the late Adedeji, when he worked at the United Nations Economic Community for Africa, one of the, and even before that, one of the works that he did is, after independence, we need to train Africans who would manage our institution, administrators. You know, in the colonial education I mentioned, they created in the urge of controlling the African, not only for the immediate need, but for the future centuries, if necessary. They created two types of schools. One called the School for Chiefs' Sons. It was very specific, all of them. Even where everywhere the struggle against the resistance against the colonial system was organized, led by men and women. And there are contexts in where women actually were the leaders. That's how many of those women suffered the same fate, by being executed or by being sent into exile. Okay. But when they felt the urge to train the future leaders, in quotation mark, who would actually feel fortunate that they have colonization, they thought of the men. So they created School for Chiefs' Sons, even where the son of a chief will never become a leader, according to the African system. Yeah. This is not the way it worked, okay? But that's what they created. This is where they fashioned the future leadership of Africa with men as the ones who should qualify to lead. And then they created a second type of school, the ordinary schools, to train men to learn technical skills to support the colonial system as administrators, and so forth. So then what the great Adedeji said, we need to train Africans to manage our system, the administrators, the technical, those who have technical capacities. So it was necessary. However, when the suggestion was made to Professor Amin to create a center for training, training center, he said we need also a center for thinking, maybe addressing some of the questions you raised. This is how he created Codestria, the Council for Social Science Research. So it didn't just happen. It was created with an African with vision, who thought that creation of knowledge is critical, and what type of knowledge? How is that knowledge used? Who has the framework? What are the epistemological references? So it was very critical. That's how Codestria was created and continues to contribute. The issue of academic freedom Codesria has been a leader in challenging and reminding African leaders that academic freedom is necessary, and it is in Africans' interest. What critical perspectives that African scholars produce is not against Africa. On the contrary, is to contribute to the proper reflection, proper inclusion of information. I don't want to name the country, not to be in trouble, but I worked for a very short time in another African country that had fascinated me for a long time. And I was working in the Ministry of Education because I was interested, curious to know the data that we use, the data collected by UNESCO, distributed, how actually on the ground the process takes place. So I was in the unit, planning unit, where the data collection also was dealt with. One of my shocks was that the project, the annual project, the annual, how they call it, budget or whatever, all the decision for the new academic year, new education year, didn't include any information. It means they were reproducing the same model. Have the realities changed on the ground? And how do we factor them in the decision-making process? This didn't exist. So that the other issue with Codesria also that has been raised many times is very important to produce, but how do we utilize it? It is really crucial when in many theses you read African students when they refer more to the Europeans, while Africans are producing on the same theme, as if you must have those European or Western scholars in your thesis in order to be taken seriously. So how do we, it's not only the state, the government, it's also in the scholarship itself. How do we support the production of knowledge, the knowledge we produce? How is it helping our own students reflect, and so on and so forth? So these are some elements of Codesria. There were many other discussions in terms of how also academics can make their work more accessible to those who are not academics. What kind of format can they imagine, create, so that they can read 1 or 2 pages guided to them? So all these issues have been debated also in Codesria. And I would like to mention in passing the Association of African Women for Research and Development Award, which was a leader in the world in terms of women organizations that were challenging the state, the colonial, neo-colonial state. There was also knowledge produced. And our position is that it's not only those who have been to Western institutions that can produce knowledge. How do we collaborate with the population? Those who have not gone through the same path, but are living the certain reality, are producing, are managing lives, who can teach a lot. West African women traders, for instance, they can be really authorities in teaching in business schools. How do we use the knowledge they produce and practice? So this, I would like to leave it here, although I have a little more to say.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think in terms of practical experience, I can just build up upon what Professor Ndiri was saying, basically in terms of kind of difficulties for publishing, not only publishing, but also we're talking about the visibility of what we do in terms of production. But I think the situation is, how do we value what we have produced. How do you value? So everything is based on this value we give as a society to that knowledge. And that's why for a long time, we have been seeing that a lot of things that we have produced will finish in drawer, right? Because no one will read them, not at the universities, not by policymakers, not for those who have, who has sometimes been the audience, the targeted audience. They don't read them. So why they don't read them? I think that is where the question is. Is it because they are not good, like in terms of quality, or is it because they are not interested in reading it? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of questions we should be asking ourselves. Mm-hmm. And then the other things that we can, I can mention is Professor Ndri was talking about citations of other scholars, basically Western scholars when you're writing your thesis. And that's also the same thing for the venue we're publishing in, right? What kind of reviews, what kind of journals our professors in Africa are asking students or asking their colleagues to publish in to have more values, right? And to get promoted. So when you're getting ready for promotion, people will be scrutinizing, where are you publishing? In what journal are you publishing? If you publish in a Western-based journal, that gives you more value than if you're publishing in a national journal. Why are we ourselves undermining our own journals, our own, right? And of course, those who are also initiating those journals, they will be reaching out people here or member of the diaspora because they believe that having someone, with kind of the tag or the brand of Harvard in the scientific committee will elevate that journal. So everything is, again, in the mindset. It's the way we're looking at our own production. It's the way we're looking at what we have ourselves putting together as journal to value and to publish and to publicize what we're doing. If we're undermining that, I don't know how and why we're blaming others to do so. So we should be starting with our own questioning, how we appreciate knowledge and how we value and elevate knowledge in the way. Once we do that, we can see that this is where we should be taking things for policy. That's how we should be working. And for me, that's kind of questions, even when I have the chance to start in Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire, teaching there, trying to publish there, go for promotion there, and then when I came here, did the same thing. So I have kind of both sides, the experience of both sides doing these kind of things. And sometimes it's so disappointing to notice that students will be asking. But it's also because probably in terms of infrastructure, those students in Africa or colleagues, young colleagues in Africa, they don't have access to the resources that we have access to here. Why? Because the public universities don't put money into building a strong and rich library. They don't see why it's important to put money in that. But they will be building something else that will please the leader of the country. But if you go to say you have to pay $500 to get access to this specific database, they will say, you don't need that. We don't have this kind of money. And the last experience I had was I spent 1 month in one university in Africa for my Fulbright specialist, and I was sometimes surprised to see how things were very slow, and sometimes you have a kind of resistance for people to move things. Of course, that means, again, we can go back to this idea of mindset is how we value, how we appreciate what knowledge is. And once it's produced, how we think that it's the main source for our nation to move forward toward development and technological progress. So That's the thought I can share.
Over to you.
Thank you. How many minutes can I speak for?
You can have 5 minutes.
Very generous. Thank you so much. Your question is very interesting. And I don't want to reveal much about myself because my answer will be part autobiographical. I trained completely in Africa, and my first job was in a policy think tank. So I was thrown fresh out of a PhD into writing position papers, policy briefs, meeting diplomats, learning etiquette, arranging how to organize meetings. It was not easy. It was very difficult because the kind of education I had did not prepare me adequately. But I was a fast learner. But there were always people standing in the bridge, and they are often not acknowledged. They are called mentors. I was able to survive that ordeal because I had good mentors and because I was determined. Secondly, my first trip outside Nigeria as a PhD graduate, fresh, full of ideas, was to a summer institute organized by Codestria. There I met Thandika Makandawire, Samir Amin, and all the big, great African thinkers, Klodaki, the whole lot, people who I had read, who had been part of the vanguard of the epistemic struggles for African voices on critical issues related to development and political economy. That changed my outlook completely. It was different from what I was taught. And I escaped from the shadow of the 3 R's. Although my arithmetic is nothing to write home about. I was very bad in arithmetic. The only arithmetic I know is what happens when I get my salary. Now, but seriously speaking, how have I engaged in my work with institutions in Africa? And I'll split them into 2. I will talk about the regional institutions, and I will also talk about the practitioner institutions. But I must say that it's not only the African Peace-Building Developmental Dynamics Program that does this kind of work. There are other institutions like the African Leadership Center, King's College London, that trains students who actually, as part of their training, are affiliated to African institutions and African regional organizations. You also have something called the African Humanities Program, which is now defunct, which was run by the ACLS. We also had something by the Harry Frank Guggenheim. A lot of initiatives training PhD students and early career scholars in Africa, a lot of it funded from this side of the world, but given space. But my work at the Social Science Research Council has, as a matter of deliberate policy, worked with African institutions. And we do it in such a way that we do not impose any particular kind of epistemology on our scholars, but we do expose them to African epistemologies. It's very fundamental to the work that we do. I have worked, after I left the Summer Institute, I published with Codestria, I participated in their conferences, and when I got to the SSRC, I had an MOU with Codestria, and we organized activities. I also have worked with Accord South Africa, which is a very important training institute for African policymakers and practitioners. I have also collaborated with the Institute for Peace and Security Studies of the University of Addis Ababa, where they actually train practitioners. They have a special master's program for. We have also, as a matter of program policy, held policy dialogues, which are really very important. You cannot leverage African knowledge if conversations are not held between scholars, policymakers, and practitioners. Policymakers need to learn how to absorb, need to even be aware of the kind of research that is taking place and how it will ease their own work, rather than parachuting in on situations after they've actually started. For the scholars, they need to understand that all these highfalutin abstract concepts do not mean anything if they cannot be practicalized and implemented. And they need to learn the strategy of shaping policy and practice. All of us have to be humble. We have to come down to speak the same language. I didn't even talk about the language of knowledge production, which is a completely different issue, but really very fundamental. We have a fellowship program that actually does immersion. In other words, you use your research findings to apply for funding to be immersed in a policy institute in Africa for 6 months and use your research findings to understand the day-to-day operations of policy institutes and how you can shape policy making based on your own research. But it is hardly ever enough. We have to scale up on a lot of such initiatives. Giving an award to 15 people or to one person is not going to change the world, it's not going to change Africa. These kind of initiatives need to be encouraged and scaled up so that more people. We have had people in the West African Network on Peace Building, which works with ECOWAS closely. We have had people at the IPSS, which is the Institute for Peace and Security Studies in Addis Ababa, which engages with the African Union. It's actually a special, it has a special status in the African Union, and our fellows are there working with. So we are actually, the APDD of the Social Science Research Council is actually taking research into policy institutions. And beyond taking our research into policy institutions and working with practitioners in their offices, we are also having policy dialogues. We've held policy dialogues in North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. And this is so important. And that is why I actually like what we are doing here. We need to listen to each other, learn from each other, understand each other. If scholars do not understand the world of policy making and practice, their research is, of what use is it? If policymakers do not understand where researchers are coming from and how key knowledge is to social transformation, because what Africa really needs is social transformation, socioeconomic transformation. Kwame Nkrumah once said that seek ye first the political kingdom, and every other thing shall be added to you. But I say, seek ye first the kingdom of knowledge, and every other thing shall be added to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before recognizing our UN system respondents, I want to give the mic over to our MC, Ben, for some announcement.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Ben Abdallah. I'm on YouTube. If you go on YouTube now, you will see that there are people joining us from Ethiopia. Somebody, Meti Desalen, is joining us from Ethiopia. And somebody I see here also joining us all the way from Russia, an African in Russia. Professor Asie Lumumba, you have somebody here, Ifia Zakia, saying, so great to see the brilliant Professor Andri Therese Asie Lumumba. And Modupe Jimo, she had a challenge with the sound, but we've got that sorted. I just want all of us to know that we are not alone here at UN headquarters. There are people joining us online. We need them to put their questions, their contributions in the chat box on YouTube. And right here in this hall, ladies and gentlemen, we need you at this moment to raise your hand so that our colleague here, Ndidi, will be taking your names so that when the floor opens in about 20 minutes we can have an orderly way of receiving your views, your thoughts, your contributions. Most importantly, like I said, if you have the solution to Africa's problem by 31st December, we will prioritize your hand and come to you. On that note, Professor Lina Ben Abdallah, I hand everybody back to you for the respondents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so at this moment, I would like to recognize Dr. Nicole Golden, the Head of Equitable Development, United Nations University Center for Policy Research, for some feedback and remarks. Over to you.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, and guests. It really is a sincere pleasure and honor to join you for this really important conversation on this final day of what has been a very rigorous academic conference. Please allow me first as well to convey the warm greetings of UNU Rector and Undersecretary General Chiliti Marwala, former Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. I know the Rector's office is really pleased that we are invited to participate, so thank you so much. I'm encouraged that so much of the agenda and what's been shared aligns with many of our objectives at UN University, including widening and transforming access to education, elevating scientific debate, inclusion, and across, of course, all of that, creating greater visibility for Africa and the Global South. This year, we mark 50 years of UN University and its long-standing mission to contribute to addressing critical global issues pertaining to development, peace, survival, and all of that really through collaborative research and education. To deliver on this mission, we function essentially as a global think tank and a postgraduate educational institution within the UN system, delivering policy-relevant research and capacity-building initiatives. So all that's been said today, really does resonate with me and our work. A key goal for UNU is to serve as a bridge between the Global South and the Global North, facilitating connections between researchers and institutions across these divides. The UNU Rector is a member of the Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board, where he consistently highlights the importance of research from Africa and the Global South in supporting policy and programmatic work of the United Nations. Across UNU, our work has been enriched by participation from, and importantly, partnership with, scholars and practitioners from Africa with deep regional and country experience, intellectual diversity, epistemological diversity has been talked about, contextual perspectives, and lived experiences. Our work and our impact of our work is strengthened and informed through different models and mechanisms of intellectual, academic, and public sector collaboration, both online and on the ground, connecting researchers and institutions and bringing academia and perspectives into policy on the range of development, justice, peace, climate, governance issues. So just want to share a few specific ideas as Lena asked us to do. We here at UNU Center for Policy Research in New York, where I sit, saw the importance of this engagement and convening as the Secretariat for the Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism, which convened and engaged preeminent scholars, intellectual and policy leaders from Africa and around the world to develop and deliver actionable policy recommendations to guide future intergovernmental frameworks and processes. So that convening aspect really is something that we continue to do. The UNU Institute for Natural Resources in Africa, hosted in our friends from Ghana will be happy to hear, in Accra, Ghana, if you're not familiar with it, for example, provides cutting-edge knowledge led by Africans for Africans on sustainable responses to natural resource management challenges. It was established in 1986, and UNU-INRA supports the sustainable development of Africa's natural resources, aiming to improve the quality of life on the continent. Another model is the UNU Hub, which is a formal collaboration between an academic institution to bridge the gap between academia and the UN system. So an example of this is UNU INWIS with a partnership with the University of Pretoria in South Africa, which hosts the UNU Hub on Resilient Environment, Agriculture, Climate, and Health for Africa. And then, UNU also engages African scholarship in policy through country-level projects, and I was, again, pleased to hear some different examples. So a great example here is in Mozambique. UNU Wider partners with the Ministry of Planning and Development, as well as the University of Eduardo Milan, who I was a couple of decades ago, I might say, honored to be a visiting PhD faculty at, as well as with other academic research institutes to implement the third phase of the Inclusive Growth in Mozambique program. So that program this partnership is conducting research and capacity building to drive policies that support the poorest and most vulnerable groups. So these are just a few examples. Digital governance and inclusion in development, especially in Africa and across the Global South, has emerged as a key issue for UNU, and our institutes are playing an important role in connecting research and African research with policy. UNU eGov, for example, hosted a major international research conference in Abuja in Nigeria just last month, and has been at the forefront of many digital governance initiatives across Africa, from capacity building in Ethiopia to projects in Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Uganda. And these efforts range from elevating research to supporting public sector digitization and inclusive education through ICT. And they all kind of demonstrate this ongoing commitment to contextually relevant solutions that empower and bring together scholars, governments, and the public. But looking forward to the future and the new era, as we've been asked to do, of academia and policymaking, I think it's important to identify and close gaps in the systems and policies. It's been mentioned, I believe, that enrollment in higher education in sub-Saharan Africa stands at less than 10% compared with a global average of nearly 40%. Cyril spoke to this as well, the ideas of inadequate infrastructure or lack of qualified faculty among being some of the structural constraints. So in this regard, in addition to the research mechanisms I talked about, UNU is also working to close gaps in the higher education pipeline and supporting the next generation of African scholars and scholars from across the Global South more broadly. UNU offers master's and doctoral programs directed at nationals of developing countries. In 2024, 320 postgraduate students enrolled across the institutes, and more than half from developing countries. An example of this is the Resource Nexus for Sustainability Transformations, which is an innovative doctoral scholarship program for students from the Global South. The pipeline is especially concerning when it comes to harnessing the promise of technology and AI, not only for unleashing African growth and development, but has been talked about for the opportunities it poses for producing and disseminating the African kind of scholarship that we've been talking about, the intellectual assets and policy ideas and innovations. And that's really important. In recent reporting, 37,000 STEM degrees were offered by higher education in Africa as compared to nearly double that in the Asia Pacific. So this is something that we're really thinking about, and to help change the situation, narrow some of that disparity. UNU is part of the initiative being led out of the UN Office of the High Representative for least developed countries and landlocked developing countries to stand up an online university initiative which would build on existing models, programs, and transferable practices, including those from UNU, to really not only deliver on STEM, but make that higher education more accessible, and again, therefore help create and build out that digital and technological capability that we think is going to be, could be an asset in dissemination and uptake. Beyond the teaching, the university will partner with global academics and facilitate capacity building of faculty. So again, that's kind of part of building this next generation and ensuring that scholarship continues. So as we enter this critical era for multilateral and national policy, we hope that the conference deliberations, and I'm keen to hear the rest of the discussion, will translate into more concrete avenues to amplify and increase the much needed African voices and scholarship to advance knowledge building, agenda setting, and decision making. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Next up, I would like to recognize Mr. Mohammed Al-Farnawani, who is Director of Priority Africa Division of UNESCO. I believe will be joining us virtually. Mr. Al-Farnawani, the floor is yours, if we can have him on. There we go. Thank you.
Has been Abdullah, Dr. bin Abdullah. Good evening from Paris. A pleasure to be talking to UN
I
headquarters.
think you may wish to use your earpieces to hear him clearer.
I can go on. A pleasure to be speaking to you from Paris, addressing everybody in room 2. Allow me on behalf of UNESCO to express our appreciation for this invitation to be part of this extremely important conversation. There are evident synergies between the present theme of this extremely important academic conference and UNESCO's mandate. In the context of the 30th anniversary of UNESCO's chairs and university twinning and networking program, the Cameroonian and South Africa-based intellectual Achille Mbembe, in his public lecture, highlighted that knowledge production is often Eurocentric and unequally disseminated from the North, advocating for a decolonization of knowledge, devoid of the vestige of colonialism, to integrate the diversity of epistemologies, including African traditional knowledge. By this, I want to make the case or reiterate what has been said, that UNESCO has well understood that knowledge production, particularly from academia, must encapsulate African thought to properly, adequately inform policymaking. Since its foundation, UNESCO's international convening power, large ecosystem of actors, has brought together both intellectuals and practitioners, including African, from the founding fathers of the general history of Africa that some of you may be aware of, such as Sheikh Anta Diop, Joseph Kizerbo, Tududu Dieng, Achille Mbembe, or Martial Zibelinga, to name a few. All have actively taken part in shaping both research and public policy. However, as you've all noted, linking research and policy is actually predicated on the development of a robust African scholarship with the adequate capacities and access to the marketplace of ideas. African scholarship and academia have found their full place in UNESCO's programs through its activities supporting higher education, research, and knowledge production, particularly under its flagship program of Global Priority Africa called Campus Africa, which seeks to address the appalling reality that, again, you mentioned earlier on in the panel, that despite its scientific output, Africa generates less than 1% of global research. Campus Africa, the program that I just mentioned, contributes to the achievement of SDG 4, quality education, ensuring equal access for all women and men to affordable and quality technical and vocational and tertiary education, as well as Aspiration 1 of Agenda 2063, including well-educated citizens and skills revolution underpinned by science, technology, and innovation. And here I refer to what Ben Malone mentioned about trying to find a solution by the 31st of December 2025. An ambitious goal, given that this is only a couple of weeks away, but we do have a roadmap for all of us Africans who work on these extremely essential issues. It is a roadmap that takes us not to the 31st of December 2025, but to the 31st of December 2062. And hopefully, if we follow this roadmap and take it from aspiration to implementation, we will be able to attain much of Agenda 2063. This is why I believe that before considering the connections between African scholarship and policymaking, the UN system, with support and inputs from institutions such as the African Union, must redouble its efforts to develop and capacitate Africa's intellectual production and research hubs. The program that I just mentioned, Campus Africa, is already a promising step. It enhances the research capacities of African tertiary institutions and supports the development of research-intensive networks to improve the production of scientific knowledge in Africa for policy use, particularly in 3 priority areas: agriculture, emerging technologies, and renewable energy. Furthermore, and as I mentioned before, the general history of Africa, which we consider to be one of UNESCO's greatest endeavors, mobilizing a wide array of African intellectuals, which is exactly a case in point. Since 1964, its 11 volumes have gathered several African scientific committees whose work and influence go way beyond history, now covering education, culture, and memorial policies. On the educational front, thanks to the political and intellectual leadership of figures such as Amadou Mahtar Mbo and Joseph Kizerbo, the way has been paved to translate the volumes into educational systems. This is probably one major challenge to the scientific community, which sometimes is disconnected from society because of its numerous technical jargons and abstract concepts. The challenge being to move from theory to societal use, the same way applied sciences enable all sorts of inventions for the daily consumptions of society. In October 2025, last month, a month and a half ago, UNESCO launched the General History of Africa Curriculum Pathway, the first pedagogical tool of the General History of Africa designed to support its member states in mainstreaming the General History of Africa into national curricula at basic and secondary education. In this regard, we have a perfect example of how African scholarship can feed educational policies through the pedagogical use of the General History of Africa. UNESCO's new Director General has prioritized the ease of access, the dissemination, and the digitalization of the General History of Africa for the general public, and particularly the youth. On this point, since our general theme is on the African statecraft and governance, I cannot not mention the tremendous opportunity that this program offers for governance, state building, pride, and leadership. By drawing from Africa's rich political history preceding slavery and colonialism, there is a political thought from which we can draw lessons to inform current models of governance in the same way Western political thought has shaped current constitutions, legal orders, and even the international system. Professor Assie Lumumba made reference to the Sankufa. Incidentally, that is the agreed upon logo of the General History of Africa, meaning to retrieve or going back to get it in the Akan language from Ghana. Likewise, on the culture and memorial front, there is still room to leverage on connections to cultural policies, such as UNESCO sites, the development of museums, the film industry, or sustainable tourism. In general, there is still need to invest in applied research to address societal challenges as highlighted during the Transforming Knowledge for Africa's Future International Forum that was convened by UNESCO and the African Union last year. Finally, management of social transformation. There is a platform that has been established in the context of UNESCO's work where research and public policy dialogue and collaboration are used to address social issues such as inequality, climate change, and digitalization. The MOST program, Management of Social Transformation, attracts recognized experts, government representatives, policymakers, and practitioners. This year's MOST Forum, whose Intergovernmental Council is chaired by the South African Minister for Science, Technology, and Innovation, was strategically held in Pretoria on the eve of the G20 ministerial meeting on sciences under the theme Solidarity, Equity, and Sustainability. The forum was deliberately aligned to the priorities of the South African G20 presidency to inform the G20 ministerial meeting. We have here a concrete, successful example of how UN agencies can bridge the gap between African scholarship and decision-making on a variety of fronts. Despite these promising gains, I must admit that a recent internal evaluation found that there was more active engagement from researchers and academics than from policymakers and civil society organizations. This calls for improvement. In the development of normative instruments, and here I'm concluding, I know we're short on time. In the development of normative instruments, UNESCO has a long tradition of including thought leaders and experts. This, in particular, concerns those related to the complex ethical issues raised by new and emerging technologies, such as robotics, AI, or neurotechnology. The process of adoption of legal instruments, such as the UNESCO recommendations on artificial intelligence and neurotechnology, were all preceded by a first draft and all recommendations produced by several experts, including African. While advisory bodies, scientific committees are a valuable tool to help bridge intellectual insights with UN system-wide priorities, there is still much room for improvement. Despite recommendations and drafts from experts, including African experts, at the stage of negotiations, difficult negotiations in those rooms in the UN in New York and elsewhere, such normative instruments, much is left to the political dynamics of member states, sometimes disregarding the insight initially provided by experts. Hence, and to conclude, as an organization that has Africa at its heart, as its global priority, UNESCO still has much to do to give African scholarship more room to shape public policies. While it is arguably one of the few UN agencies that very early attempted to include African intellectual thought in its work, much is still to be done. Not doing so would be a lost opportunity. From African electoral processes to development issues, linking those who reflect with statesmen is a win-win affair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. El-Farnawani, for this. And now I would like to recognize our third respondent, Ms. Jayashri Wyatt, who is the Chief of Education Outreach Division of the United Nations Department of Global Communications. Please, the floor is yours.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Thank you so much. What an amazing conversation this morning. And how wonderful to be in this room that Undersecretary General Duarte has gathered here along with her team. My team from the United Nations Academic Impact has been here in deep listening mode over the last 3 days. And I think bringing all of these extraordinary academics and experts, and especially the young people who are gathered in the room too, who have a chance to engage, is just a real signal of your leadership of making sure that African voices and African scholarship is at the heart of the United Nations. And so I just really thank you for making this happen today. And I thank all of the speakers who really, I think, elucidated on this theme today, ideas that build nations, leveraging African scholarship for a new era of policymaking. So today I've really heard how the nexus of scholarship and practice is so important, the critical nature of academic freedom, and also really decolonizing knowledge systems and systems of science. I think these are really important issues that we in the United Nations Academic Impact take really seriously. So our work is really focused on engaging universities and institutions of higher learning in aligning strategically to the values and principles of the United Nations and also to the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a network of over 1,800 universities in over 160 countries. So Dr. Ben Abdallah, when I heard you say the scholarship is here, the scholars are already here, and Dr. Obi, you were talking about how do we make it more visible. I want to just share with you that in the network we have 17 UNAI SDG hubs that are led by university institutions, 2 of whom are based in Africa. We also have 7 other vice chairs that form a part of this hub system, and this hub system is really meant to bridge between universities and the UN system. So this is a really powerful engagement tool. So I just recognize Mount Kenya University as the hub chair of SDG number 9, Industry, Innovation, and Infrastructure, and the University of Pretoria is leading SDG number 3 on good health and well-being. The other thing is that we take really seriously working with young, burgeoning African scholars. So I want to give you a really concrete example of how we do that. We have a partnership with the Millennium Campus Network. It is a global partnership. And recently we did a huge event on the sidelines of the High-Level Political Forum in July. And a young African scholar whose name is Kende Adebayaye, he's a microbiologist, and he's a 2018 Millennium Fellow from Lagos State University. And this is what he had to say about the support we're giving to young African scholars. He said that the impact of the fellowship had been immeasurable on his work. He said, "I am honored to be co-leading Health Drive NG, which is Nigeria's largest hepatitis screening initiatives, which has provided testing and vaccination to over 5,000 individuals across 26 states, tackling a silent crisis that affects more than 20 million people. The pilot stage of this initiative began as part of his Millennium Fellowship project, and he says further, quote, "The fellowship instilled in me the confidence to lead myself and others in turning bold ideas into impact, a mindset that continues to empower the growth of our initiative and my professional journey as a scientist." So these are some of the ways that we're really engaging both with the scholarship on the continent and also directly with young scholars. So I thought that was really worth mentioning. I also heard you, Dr. Ase Lumumba, talking about the nature of how education has been so colonized. We have also listened carefully during the Transforming Education Summit that was held in 2022 in September here at headquarters. And the Youth Declaration said it was critical to decolonize education. And so this is something that we're listening to very, very carefully as well. So in terms of leveraging these young scholars and also our African universities, we have a monthly webinar. And so I just invite anyone who is here, any institutions that would like to be part of those webinars, I'd like to invite each of you on the panel to join us for that in 2026. Because I think the how-to is part of the problem that we don't really have the right answers to. So I invite you on that front as well. So the other thing I heard also from Professor Babo was about how we can bring academics much closer to policymakers, and I agree with you 100%. So I think similar to UNU, we are able to bridge between academics and policymakers. We have convening power similar to UNU, and so this year on the sidelines of the HLPF, we convened a group of scholars, including African scholars, to create a consensus document among scholarship, which really focuses on academic freedom and decolonization of knowledge systems and science systems. And so again, that consensus document is going out. We want to invite all of you to also contribute to that survey and to some of the analysis that we are putting together. And last but not least, I just take the opportunity to invite any other institutions in the room to join us, because we need more African scholars that are African-centered, that are a part of our initiative. Currently, we have 139 higher education institutes from Africa that are part of our initiative, part of the 1,800 universities. But we need to double, triple, quadruple those numbers. So please help us and reach out to me, and we'd like to include your universities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So up next, we have this moment that we are all have been looking forward to, is to bring in the audience and give the floor to as many people as we can. We have a long list, which only shows excitement for this topic and excitement for these conversations that we're having. So please, in order to accommodate as many of us as possible, I beg that you really limit your comments and questions and solutions to very effective, efficient, and short. And I will do the same, so I'll begin. When your number is recognized, if you can just keep your hand up, as you've probably been instructed already, until your mic turns red. So let's go ahead and begin. Number 328. Okay, the next will be 387. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much, panelists, for this rich debate. My name is Bakri Tanja. I am the co-chair of the Abolition Institute, a human rights organization focusing on slavery, particularly in Mauritania and the Sahel region. Since this conference is about identifying problems and proposing solutions, I have a question in the form of a recommendation. To the panel, my question is this: what do you think about the creation of a body of volunteers in the office of the Special Advisor on Africa to coordinate and guide the contribution of the diaspora into the transformative framework this conference is seeking to achieve? Thank you.
Thank you. 381. Go ahead. If you can also introduce yourself and go ahead as soon as the mic turns red. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Lovis Fembombi. I'm a research scientist, hold a doctorate degree. I work with the Columbia Climate School across Africa. So my research is focused across the African continent. And we have been discussing since Monday about how to solve African problems. And my question is, we have had models, we have had theories, we have had policies for the past 80 years that has been trying to solve African problems. And today, we are still talking about this problem. what concrete solutions can we all here start by taking actions to solve this problem? Should we keep accusing the oppressor, or we should take action to solve our own problems? The second question I have, and the last one is, were Africans truly given independence, or they were just accorded freedom of speech that we have been making these speeches for the past 80 years plus, and we keep making them? So was there actually an independence when our institutions lack, its operationality and its sovereignty? Thank you.
Thank you. 486. Yeah, we're just waiting for it to turn red. Just one moment. All the way in the back there. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this enriching discussion. My name is Bimisola Oshadwa, a PhD candidate from the University of Geneva, Switzerland, and currently a fellow at the Harvard Law School Center for Study of Africa Economies and Society. My PhD research is focused on international trade and investments with a regional focus on Africa. I have a comment to make in form of a proposition, and I target my proposal stemming from this conversation today. Dr. Obi addressed some pertinent questions, which I believe the essence of this discourse and interaction is for us to come up with solution. And because of that discussion, of course, the moderator has excellently pointed out that, yes, it is not, the challenge is not about the production of knowledge, is not, and which I agree with as a researcher. And yes, we are not just consumers, but then the connection to practice. And this has been a major concern for me as a researcher in my final year of the research, saying and asking myself, thinking about contribution. The output from my research, how do I translate it into practice? And this was what informed my decision at the inception of my research in Geneva, when I sit in policy discussion rooms like this, and I see in some of those conversations, the people sitting on the panel do not have the lived experiences on the continent. And as a result of that, I had to introduce making proposals to the institutions in Geneva on specific African thematic sessions where we bring people who have the lived experience on the continent to come together to have these discussions in Geneva to shape policies that would affect a continent that makes almost the largest number of this multilateral institution. And these policies affect the continent. And that points to my first proposal, which is the power of convening. The power of convening, and not just convening, but making it cross-sectoral, bringing all the stakeholders to the table. And I will allude to an importance of this, making reference to the reform of the ease of doing business in Nigeria years back, where the current Minister of Trade and Investment, who was then leading the presidential business environment, introduced this initiative, and this initiative actually brought lawyers and policymakers and everyone together. As a young lawyer in Nigeria then, being in those rooms, making contribution to what will lead to ease of doing business. And that particular reform, for 2 consecutive periods that I followed, led to a transformation in the ease of doing business in Nigeria. Does that mean we have gotten there yet? No, but at least it's impacted on the movement. And then that takes me to my second point, which is on proposal for this discourse, training researchers on the linkage for application. And then I will share what I call the IRAC principle.
Thank you so much. We have
identifying the issues and linking it up with the output of our research and addressing those problems on the continent. And the last one, which is on digital, how we can use digital to leapfrog this output of our research in connecting it to the solutions on the continent, even while we're making this research in the diaspora or in whatever institutions we are in. So I believe these proposals will make an impact in translating our research into action. Thank you very much.
367. All right.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, and of course, warm appreciation to all the distinguished professors who made very, very excellent submissions today. We are really grateful to have this kind of conversation, and we wish that it will continue. I'll just be very quick with some things I noted. Yes, I agree with, I think it was Professor Lumumba who said that the African educational system must be redesigned for effectiveness to the African states. We see that sometimes, a lot of the time rather, the system of education that we have is really borrowed and imported, and a lot of the time it doesn't solve or address particularly African problems and African circumstances. So I think that's one thing policymakers should look at in the first instance. Secondly, think tanks, the suggestion by Professor Babu that said think tanks and governments could gather periodically to review and policies, how effective they have been, and to proffer recommendations for the future. That is critically important, I think. In Nigeria, we have, I think, Professor Obi's parent institution, the National Institute for International Affairs. It's in the foreign policy sector. They are supposed to, that institution is supposed to make recommendations for government. So that's one angle where Nigeria tries to have such kind of interaction between the academia and policy making. We also have the National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies, which is for policy generally, that does the same thing. And yes, strong link between government and the academia. In some countries, I've served in some countries where you kind of see a revolving door between the academia and government. So some people come from the academia, they get into government, they finish from government, they go back to the academia. I've not seen a lot of that in African societies. You know, if you have the cases where you can get a professor who gets into government, once they get into government, they never return to the academia, and then they, you know, so that's something I think, you know, we can try to borrow from some of these societies. There should be that revolving door. And
if I could interject, I want you to end on that very high note. We are begging everybody to just keep it short. Help Professor Ben Abdallah. You and I are here. I will take the rest from you later. So we appeal to everyone, just keep it short and straight, and then we like the energy, help us to shape it. Help Professor Ben Abdallah.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so we keep going. We'll recognize Nadej, 331. If you can raise your hand so that they can turn your mic on. Perfect.
All right, thank you so much. I've actually written my questions so that I can stay on target. But first, thank you all for such rich insights and for inviting us into more conversations. I was thinking of the revolutionary leader, Amilcar Cabral, as you were all speaking. Yes. And I was thinking of the quote that he said, "There's no revolution without revolutionary ideas." And his understanding was also that revolutions lead to epistemic transformations, which would ultimately sustain resistance against colonial structures. We do know, however, that many a revolution, including past and present ones on the continent, have been co-opted away from their initial goals. So I wondered, what do you think is the role of revolutions in today's epistemic struggle in Africa? And I want to use Dr. Obi's words. What kind of epistemic resistance is possible when resistance itself gets co-opted? Thank you.
Thank you so much. 419, 419.
Oh. Hello? Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here. I'm Azhar, a PhD candidate, Africana Studies, Cornell University. I'm Professor Lumumba's student. She's my supervisor. Shout out to Professor Lumumba. I'll keep it really quick. I'm from Sudan. 3 years ago, I moved to the US, displaced refugee, same story of so many other Sudanese people. And my question is, what if you could give me one word as to how you could rebuild a conflict, rebuild a state after conflict. With the case study of Congo, Rwanda, Sudan now, my research is focused on that. What would it be? And on that note, in terms of colonialism, why are we avoiding the fact that there is neo-colonial presence within the institution that we're in right now? And I've seen this in Sudan. A white man makes decisions on behalf of us. And as someone who's been a victim of war, it's not always the best decisions for us. So why is this still the case? Why is majority of senior management still someone of a certain race? And are we replicating neo-colonial structures that originally started hundreds of years ago?
Four, 443.
Hello, so I am Sarah Coutusson. I am an intern here for the PPA, Department of Political Affairs and Peace Building. I actually went to King's College in London. And so my question is on the place and importance of language. It has been mentioned very briefly, but being here and at the UN where French and English are dominant mediums of sharing and expressing our ideas, this brings the point, and it determines what we can express, but also how to sort of legitimize our knowledge. And my question is, when producing in those languages, do we still think in and in limited colonial boundaries? And how can our local and traditional languages be empowered as full intellectual instrument for producing and sort of like disseminating our knowledge? I thank you.
Thank you. I would like to recognize 336, Professor Okome.
Thank you very much. I want to say the problems that we are facing. Oh, Mojuba Olufunke Okome. I teach political science, African studies, and women's studies at Brooklyn College. And I've been an immigrant in this country for 44 years. I think the problems we're facing are the following: cronyism and gatekeeping in terms of who we let into the room and whose voices we're interested in hearing. There's a male stream. The word is not male stream. Men, when there's power, they capture the terrain, and women and women's voices are not included. For example, Codesria has never seen fit to have a woman lead the organization. The mainstream thing is from Amina Mama and Pereira, who criticized Codesria for this tendency. However, I've actually worked with Codesria at great cost to myself to mentor especially female PhD students. And I continue to mentor them beyond the 1 year that Codesria has said I should. There's also inadequate resources. And this is both financial, material, and prestige. There's epistemic violence. Everybody has said it. And there's structural violence that informs that epistemic violence. Because I don't have much time, I can't go into this. So, for the United Nations University, to what extent is there genuine commitment to collaborative work with Africans? I'm talking about not the partnership of the horse and rider, but partnership that truly respects Africa. I'm not seeing it in any institution that sees itself as important, that is multilateral yet. UNESCO, I want to know whether the general history of Africa is now complete, you know, because I see it as an incomplete project. Now, you know, in 2002, I made an intervention about how I see higher education as a political economy issue. The piece is online. People can go and refer. I was looking at Nigeria. I think we Africans, the state, and maybe even now young people who don't see education as important. We don't spend enough money on education. There's a brain drain. I'm part of it, regrettably. And I don't see any brain gain. even as we're connecting with home and doing things. Now, what are the solutions that I want to propose? Embrace the use of information technology. I did so. I established 2 journals. They're peer-reviewed. I funded it, and I'm still funding one. I left the other one because they wanted to start charging money. Be sacrificial in your commitment to African development. Mentor people, even if it's costly to you. Be the change you want to see. Seek partnerships and collaboration. Don't be discouraged, because some of those people are going to leave you when things get hard. But we can't wait for the institutions that are oppressing us to liberate us. I have done that in my life. I can go into it if people want to talk to me after. I mean, stop depending on these people. When Columbia told me, Columbia University, I got my PhD, that they like to brand people, I said, I'm not on a plantation. I will not be branded. And that's why I'm so radical now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I'm also told we have some questions online. MC, can we have you read to us a few of them before we continue with our long list?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and fish them out as quickly as we can in the meantime. Professor Funke, you didn't mention that you are planning to retire in Lagos, which will then be a brain gain for all of us. We also need to mention that your countrywoman and sister, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, left the World Bank to serve as finance and foreign, but she didn't have it easy, so we will just acknowledge that. I will come back to this in a moment because the chat has suddenly decided to play African magic with me.
Can I recognize?
So I will
okay.
come back.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. All right, so an opportunity to call 383. Okay. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, panelists, for your information and for being here today. My name is Melvin Mofis. I'm a recent graduate from the City College in Harlem, CUNY. Thank you, CUNY. And my question is, okay, so the idea that many countries within Africa today are still within a process of nation building was brought up many times by the people of the panel today. Even though this may be true, some of the solutions that were brought up to address the policy issues still present themselves within the framework of the idea of the nation state, which can often materialize itself as a vague and hazy political framework, which is based off of politics, which has been demonstrated time and time again that it is socially constructed. The thought that politics and therefore nation states are socially constructed is often not thought of or is just simply overlooked. I personally prefer the concept of imagining a nation over the concept of nation building.
Okay.
I believe that language opens up the possibilities. I personally also believe that power is not created, it is simply transferred, which can be seen historically and anthropologically within many civilizations throughout time and geography.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Are we ready, MC, or should I call somebody else? Okay, go ahead.
I'm here looking at the questions from YouTube. We have people joining us from Moscow, from Zambia, from Florida. From Moscow, Dr. Costelia Nets. Outside powers like the US, China, Russia, the EU, Gulf monarchies intensify their competition for influence on the continent. It is pretty much a new scramble for Africa. The question is, how can the African state move beyond being a pawn on a geopolitical chessboard? What concrete strategies can African states employ both individually and through bodies like the African Union to leverage this competition to their own advantage, to ensure that seizing the moment translates into genuine long-term sovereignty and prosperity for the people of Africa, not just short-term gains for external actors. From Zambia, Martin Kangwa, how can the gap between the scholars and policymakers be bridged? And then when we come back into the YouTube box, I have somebody, Dr. Kole Odutola from Gainesville, Florida. I think you gave recommendations that we must all read. Remi Alapo, Isaiah Chabala, Knowledge Production Beyond Coloniality, Epistemic Sovereignty in African and Afro-diasporic Institutions. I think that's the recommendations. There is a lot more, but Dr. Ben Abdallah, time is fast running against us. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll recognize 337. Ayub, what is yours?
Thank you. My name is Iyo Balcha. I'm an Ethiopian who works at University of Bristol in the UK. I want to make a connection between the dots on epistemic sovereignty, epistemic dignity, paradigm shift, and African scholarship. What we need to recognize is the significant majority of academic knowledge production in Africa is produced through international research collaborations. And the UNESCO Science Report of 2021, for example, details that between 88 to 85% of academic knowledge production in Central, Southern, and Eastern Africa is through international research collaborations. I work with Africans who co-produced the African Charter for Transformative Research Collaborations. One of the significant layers of power imbalance in this knowledge production is we frame it as the development frame. What the development frame does is it has one unidirectional gaze of shaping academic knowledge production about Africa, essentially defined through the deficit model. Africa is studied only for its problem, for the conflict, for lack of resource, for lack of water, sanitation, gender. All the other potential areas of academic knowledge production are not adequately considered as research or academic spheres, where, for example, the ICT, the physics, the astronomy, whatever, I'm sorry it says within the UN, the acidization of the African academic ecosystem is wrong, and that's the fundamental problem. The development aid, whenever the UK or the UN or the USA is cutting back aid, it's the academic knowledge production that's affected. We need to decouple academic excellence and academic knowledge production from the development frame. Otherwise, we will keep on still trying to find solutions within the same orientation. By doing so, we are also that unidirectional gaze also kind of closing the door for the global north or the entire humanity to benefit from African epistemic orientation, to study the global north. We study Ubuntu, to study African societies. Have you ever imagined using Ubuntu or the Akan philosophy to study Europe or Asia or Canada or North Africa? So I think, just to conclude, the development frame is part of the problem. We need to decouple African academic knowledge production from this very neocolonial, Eurocentric, unidirectional framework.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. (472). Yeah. If you can keep your hand raised until the mic turns red, thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. Thank you to all the speakers. My name is Nelly. I'm currently a student at Harvard University, and I'm from Côte d'Ivoire. So it's my honor to meet Professor Babo and Professor Lumumba. My question is for Professor Babo. How can we translate African academic knowledge into public policies capable of responding to the continent's contemporary crisis? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. 379. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Latifa Odunuga, doctoral candidate of community psychology. I'm going to reiterate the point of Dr. Professor, is it Foluke or Funke? I forgot, but Olufunke. But I have to reiterate in this room that with academic scholars here, there has been an epistemicide of women. There's been an epistemicide of African women. There has been something called academic bullying and intimidation of African black women when it comes to knowledge production. There's also been an epistemicide of knowledge holders, people who we collect knowledge from without returning the knowledge that we collect from them. And then these civil society organizations use them for program evaluation, and then they take the knowledge from them without giving them adequate the amount that they're getting, and then we sell this knowledge back to Western donors. We need to put a stop to that. And because Dr. Obi, you mentioned 98 million children are out of school. I know that we don't have kids in this room, and I want us to bring back the position of the decolonial education. Why can we not teach the science of fufu in schools? Why can we not teach the chemistry of palm oils in schools? Why can we not teach Nigerian Space Agency Development Research that's been established in 1999? Nigerian children don't know that they have a space agency. Let us talk about NASA in this type of spaces and not NASA. I think I'm gonna just keep quiet. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Four, 454.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Hana Ashatu. I was born and raised in Ethiopia, but I've been working here in Brooklyn, New York, as a teacher for the last 4 years. My question is very similar to the panelists and everybody that's been commenting recently, specifically on the attacks on teachers and using punitive measures against teaching histories and the non-colonial histories and the realities of the world we live in. So my question is, how can educators and scholars protect the epistemic freedom of African and diasporic youth and support their advocacy and imagination despite these constraints? Thank you so much.
Thank you. 443. All right. 408.
Thank you. My name is Mike Martinez, and I'm also from Brooklyn College, CUNY, and a member of the Eco-Social Contract Network at UN Research Institute for Social Development. There are so many ways access to education is beheld and that we discussed today, but I quickly want to respond to something. I'm inspired by Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. And to push the concept of that title further, people who are born into poverty or with a disability, born in conflict zones, are sometimes prohibited a right to a birth certificate or a registration. And that also leads to them being prohibited from joining schools. And this happens in Africa and outside of Africa. And this problem causes us to lose out on visibility of indigenous knowledge, national productivity, and even ways to make our world sustainable. So while we decolonize our structures, our institutions, education, and social attitudes, we have to make sure that our governance and our administration contains everyone. And let's be honest, not acknowledging someone's existence is one way colonialism can still persist in its new form. So I call everyone to, it's not a matter, all means all, especially in education and public service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I can take potentially one more question before I turn it over to our panelists for a quick 1-minute wrap-up comments. And unfortunately, the list is long, and I apologize for not being able to accommodate everyone, but we'll take 472. And, okay. 373. All right.
I think I'm lucky, so. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yassine Fathali. I'm advisor with... you hear me? Okay. So I'm advisor with Jusu Youth Organization. It's a youth-led organization focused in North African and Middle East area. So my question is how we can get the expertise of any another area like Europe or American or wherever, but we don't give the chance to them to use our resources. And also, if we want to do this, we can do it with a lot of experience we have in our area, such as Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, and all of these countries have more expertise, and we can build our area with these programs in these countries. The another question is, when I see all the youth resources in this room, or all the people go and study in Harvard and all of this, big universities, and then doesn't have a chance to come back in our area and to lead our area. So I think we need revolution of knowledge to all our decision makers to give us the chance to lead our countries. And thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so instead of me making any closing remarks for this session, I will just hand it over to our panelists to make one comment, because we have a sharp stop at 1 p.m. But before then, we also have to leave some time for closing remarks by USG and by the moderators from the days prior. So please, I will give you each just one minute to wrap up, and we'll move on to the next segment.
Wow, there are so many wonderful questions I would love us to really discuss. What I would like to say to my sister here, I wrote an article on Codestria, why the gender issue is still persistent. And one of them is related to the initial conceptualization through Marxism. I'm not against, I do a lot of work with that critical perspective, that if we're talking about issue of inequality generally, when we achieve that equality through this struggle, there won't be any more gender. And I felt that it was an error, because women were in such a situation historically, all the way from creating school for chiefs' sons, creating school for men, because European tradition is the man is the breadwinner, even if we don't, it's not bread. Cassava winner, women also win the cassava. Anyway, I wrote that article. To my brother, Professor, briefly, when I became president of the Comparative and International Education Society, the first African, since the 1956 it was created, to become president, it was an honor. So I felt that I had to make an African contribution. So the topic that I proposed was Ubuntu. Imagining a humanist education globally, you have no idea the resistance. But those who resisted gave me the motivation to do it, because I know it is a neo-colonial continuation. Why can't we use an African philosophical idea to analyze the world? Let me conclude by saying, Professor Compaore, you reminded us yesterday of Mwalimu Mazrui. Do not go back to this Gloriana, because there is enough. But it's not only enough in the past, there is enough today to guide the world. Africa, using Ubuntu, for example, could provide leadership in trying to think of issues of the environment, issues of loneliness, issues, all these issues can be dealt with an African philosophical perspective. So, too bad, thank you, but the time is not enough.
Thank you for all your questions. I guess we probably have the chance, especially for me, to chat with those who addressed me direct questions, because I don't have enough time, but I would be happy to continue that conversation later. I just wanted to maybe build up on what Eyob was saying. And that is really impressive, that we have been studying ourselves and not studying others. We send students in France, I'm talking from the Francophone part, we send students in France, in China, everywhere, but when they go there and the thesis is still about what we're doing in Africa. When Europeans come to Africa, They study what we're doing, how we're eating, how we're sleeping, everything we're doing, and they know that. And to get better information about Africa, you have to go to, for example, the Francophone Africa, you have to go to Paris, the famous library in Paris or in Brussels to learn about what's happening in Africa. So I will conclude with one article I published in 2012 when I was saying, why do we have in Africa this complex of adopting or developing the culture of domination? Because others don't have that complex. US, China, Europe, they show that they want to dominate the world. And they express that. And they use technology, they use education, they use everything to dominate the world. I'm not talking about being afraid of using the term strong state, but we should be able to also think about how we use our culture to spread that culture in the world. And that's exactly what China is doing today. A couple of years ago, people were laughing at China when they were sending their students to learn what's happening in Europe, in US. But today, we all know that we have Chinese fabrics or whatever in our kitchen, in our bedrooms, everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would conclude the way I started. Knowledge is power, but power is not usually given up. You have to seize it by creatively and strategically organizing yourself and your world in order to transform it. Thank you.
All right, should I hand it back to Ben, our MC, for the next segment?
Always available. The next segment, what we are going to do is get some other viewpoints from your dynamic colleague here, who rattled the cages on Monday. Dr. Akpeyi, famous name, Shoyinka Ariwele. We need you to say a couple of things. Is Professor Lembe? Oh, okay. My Cameroonian brother is there. Yesterday, he took his students here to the General Assembly Hall. So one day when they become leaders speaking from there, he could watch them. Professor Lina Ben Abdallah, if we have time, you should also wrap something up. So shall we do 1 minute each?
No, we were told 5.
You were told 5? Mm-hmm. Can we not do an African Ubuntu and bargain?
We were cheated on Monday,
okay.
and we're being cheated again today.
We have 10 minutes to 1 o'clock.
We will rush it. Thank you so much again. My wonderful colleagues, Professor Kume, Professor Gebre Merman, and Professor Mutunga all spoke with us on the panel on Monday. Very quickly, we examined the state of the state in Africa, presence, perception, and performance in the changing world. So very quickly, some of the issues we looked at obviously had to do with, we agreed, as with all of you, that we are facing a crisis of failed states, weak states, vulnerable, fragile states, and an absent state. We agreed that the perception of this state cannot be isolated from a historical racism that shapes Africa's continued treatment at the hands of powerful global hegemons, laying a basis for militarized interventions today, such as the recent threats of invasion or the devastating extractive incursions across the continent, veiled under disguises such as the brokering of peace deals in Central and Eastern Africa. That the same historical, capitalist, racist, hegemonial, neo-colonial issues you've all been talking about in every comment is the one that reduces the state and Africans to the inferior other, subjecting our states to a hegemonial order in which international law, trade, loans, the media, the academy, and multilateral organizations systematically inflict continued violence upon us, as with the very recent pause on immigration applications for 19 high-risk countries, with Africans being 11 of those 19. We agree that true liberation would demand political, economic independence, epistemological freedoms, not capitulation to the dominant world. We've said all these things. We all agree on these things. The question, Madam Duetes, put to all of us was, can the academy make a difference? And I felt a lot of pessimism emerge from a lot of people. We felt a weight of the hegemony almost destroying the capacity. Where do we go from here? And I have to disagree a little bit. I'm not an eternal optimist. I would call myself a pragmatic idealist in many ways. But I believe that when you have a problem of a perpetuating neocolonial system, it's an edifice, a house. You know, when you reference Audre Lorde's The Master's House, she did not say the Master's house cannot be demolished. She just said you cannot use those tools to demolish the house. The question should be, what are the tools that we want to use to demolish that house? And what Lourdes was saying is that if you want to hide in that house, thinking that by assimilation you will be hidden and protected, it doesn't work. She said the power and the strength is in your difference, the difference you bring out there. That is one of the things that all the speakers have been saying. What is the African difference coming to the academy? I want to quickly just say this with reference to this conversation. One of the issues that we don't look at is how do you cut off the artery of a system that is bleeding you? Look at the policies and the pillars. In most African universities today, scholars are systematically incentivized to produce in foreign journals. You get a higher point value for producing even in a scam Turkish journal than in an African local journal. These are simply arteries that you can cut off. We need a structure, a system by which scholars, as a congress of scholars, can target our institutions and the national commissions and begin to transform those pillars that uphold the neo-colonial enterprise. Let us not capitulate, give in, or appease it. Let us cut it off at its roots. Thank you.
Professor, don't say Peggy, it's Peggy Shoyinka Ariwele. She's a surgeon of Africa, you can tell. Professor Lembe Tiki, how many minutes am I bargaining with you?
It's hard to follow. It's hard to come after Professor Perry, but I'll try. I'll try to do that in 1 or 2 minutes, if that's okay. So our session was about transforming the state, and I was here with Professor Nadej Compaoré, Professor Wanchekon, and Professor Obiora. And so we discussed the state and how to transform it. Why the state? Why are we paying so much attention to the state? Well, because the state has been historically, and if we're talking about the Westphalian state, has been a great engine for progress. But that Westphalian state was imposed upon Africa, but without providing it the tools to also lead, that will lead to progress. And so it's important we recognize, all of us here yesterday, that state is in crisis. And we did recognize that again today. That state in crisis, thus the idea of transforming it. But then how to transform it? Since I cannot discuss everything that we talked about yesterday, I will just say this about transformation. Who is to transform the state? Obviously Africans. But which Africans? Let me give you, to end a basketball example about who to transform it. Keep in mind, that is the question, who to transform that state. If the transformers are also the one with the power to do it, will they ever transform it? No. So we need agency, right? If you take the example of basketball players or a basketball game, if you have on one side the Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, all the top professionals, and you have these people here playing against them, we know the result, right? And so if you're asking the transformers, if you're asking the people with power to do that transformation, it will never happen. We concluded the session yesterday by saying that it's important to decolonize the state, right? And we consider a global environment in which the African state is operating, and that we need to consider that. And we need to, for the transformers, we are not going to identify them here, but for those transformers, they need to consider that environment and work to create an African order, not just to be submissive to the global order. Create an African order, which means For example, economic liberalization, the African way. The African Union has started that, so it's a continuous project, right? The continental trade area is an example of things to do. Remove the borders. If you say decolonize the state, well, remove the borders. That's one way to decolonize the state, decolonize African states. And I'll conclude with this, something that we also discussed, defense. If you have something precious, you should put together a strategy to defend what is precious to you. So you need an African defense strategy. You need an African defense industry, because the world, the West understand one thing, and that is power, period. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tiki. I'm just disappointed you used a basketball analogy. You're from Cameroon. You should have used a World Cup soccer analogy, but it's okay.
Cameroon is out, so.
don't worry. Ghana is there for Cameroon and Nigeria.
Okay.
So thank you. We want to thank you, Professor Babo, Professor Ben Abdallah, Professor Asie. I want to speak Twi with you afterwards. Ivorian, I want to bring my Ghanaian Twi the same way I speak Amharic with my brother Eyob. Dr. Obi, many questions. Sounds like Jimmy Cliff, many rivers to cross. We will be mulling over this. Please let me say something. If you wanted to ask a question and you didn't get the chance, I'm pleading with you. Your thoughts are much appreciated. You raise your hand, write your question, your name and your email, and this wonderful sister here, Ndidi, will come and take the questions. We will put everything online and get answers to them. The discussions here are not ending in the next few minutes when I hand over to the Under-Secretary General. This is going to continue. That way we will all benefit. Professor Akpeyi, what can I say? Adupe? Muito obrigado. Can we put our hands together for the woman who led us here? There is, you cannot doubt her passion for Africa. He doesn't want anybody to think Africa is an empty place for experimentation or for dumping ideas. Her hand is up. As soon as the light turns red, then I'm going to stop introducing her. Former finance minister of Cabo Verde. Maybe we should appoint all of Africa's finance ministers from Cabo Verde. And when we need aviation experts, we go to Ethiopia. And when we need soccer stars, I'm not quite sure where we would go. Please give the red light, which should actually be the green light, to the woman who led all of us here, the Under-Secretary General. Voila. I can stop talking now.
I have 1 minute, so allow me to read one slide that I present in Cape Verde. You are there together. I did a presentation about exactly the same subject. I have been talking about this in the past couple of years. Africa's future depends on what we know and who knows. A foundational premise is the future of Africa's sovereignty will be determined not only by what we possess, but by what we know and how we use that knowledge. For too long, power has been misinterpreted as the monopoly of the state, the dominance of armed forces, or the calculus of international diplomacy. But in the 21st century, in a world where algorithms make policy, data defines credibility, and narratives shape founding flows, power must be redefined. And for Africa, it must be recentered. Power today lies in the ability to name the problem before others do, and to do so using frameworks that reflect your own lived reality. It lies in the ability to set your own priorities, rather than having them prescribed. It lies in determining what counts as evidence, what counts as success, and whose voice counts in the process. That is why this conversation on the centrality of African knowledge in African policy making is not academic. It is a sovereignty issue. Africa's liberation struggle was not only fought with rifles and rallies, but it was fought with ideas. Amilcar Cabral, thank you, I don't know who mentioned here. And for that weapon, African scholars must be not just observers or analysts, but co-authors of the future. Let us then start by redefining what power means in Africa and by claiming it where it has been most quietly eroded, in the realm of knowledge. Thank you.
And on that note, muito obrigado. Thank you very much, Under-Secretary General. Dalu adupe midawasi.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Shukran jazilan. Merci beaucoup. Akpenami oyiwaladon. Eshegon. Mehet Senate. Amasaganalo. Nyekanyele. Who have I left out? Nagode. Mungode. Thank you, everyone. Do me a favor before you leave here. Reach out to somebody and get their phone number and email address, and let's continue the conversation. Get to one or two people, and God bless us all. God bless Africa and Kosikelili Africa.